On today's episode of the Data Trek, we have Kunal Haria, the data engineering manager at StyleSeat. We're going to discuss interviewing tips for data engineers and also transitioning from a lead to a manager. Enjoy the show. Kunal, thanks for joining us today. Please tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Ash, for having me on this podcast. I'm Kunal Haria. I'm an engineering manager at StyleSeat. I manage the data engineering team where, team's mission is kind of to deliver data insights reliably to everyone in the company. I've been involved with data engineering for the past 6 to 7 years. And some of the projects that we are currently working at StyleSeat is from our pivot from a SaaS model to marketplace model. So we are working on understanding the marketplace dynamics for the beauty industry and kind of build models and the data infrastructure to support that transition.
Sounds like you got a lot of moving parts over there right now.
Yeah, especially the business is going through so much of change and there's a lot of data being captured and processed. We want to make sure that we're using it in the right way to build a smarter product.
Sure, definitely makes sense. Yeah, I wanted to get into it. I know the data engineering skill set, that world is growing and data engineers are in high demand. And I think when, you're in high demand, it's also how do you differentiate between other engineers within your space? So I was curious for you when you're hiring and looking at resumes, what are you looking for? Are there any particular things that you want to see in those resumes, or what do you see as better than not and what comes through the desk for you?
In terms of resume review, I kind of, take two different approaches. One approach I take is for reviewing senior or principal engineers. I basically look for a different set of criteria versus for a person who is just starting out or is more of a mid-level engineer. So for senior engineers, I basically look how they've been, kind of transitioning in their role, what kind of technologies they've used. If they've been with, a company for a few years, I want to see how they progress and, kind of the projects that they've been working on. So if somebody lays it out very clearly in their resume, I think that stands out very well for me. For somebody who is starting out, I usually, look for some certifications, public GitHub repositories, and not like a namesake GitHub repository. They should be actively coding and updating them. If they're data scientists, they should be looking at some public data sets. If they're data engineering, I would want to see some, projects where they've used, some web scraping libraries or something like that. Yeah, so those are the few things that I look for in data engineers.
What do you see in this space moving forward, especially with data engineering and a lot of data being streaming? I mean, what do you see as the skill sets that those individuals need to do and keep up to stay relevant?
Yeah, so the breadth of data engineering and within the engineering organization is kind of spreading out. So you see data engineers doing a lot of ETL, dashboarding, reporting. You also see data engineers doing a lot of data platform work where they are working mainly with Spark and kind of building that streaming or batch processing systems. So, depending on, the kind of role that we are hiring, we basically look at those kind of technologies. Like if we're looking for somebody to, make our streaming infrastructure more solid, I would be definitely looking for somebody who is using Spark in some capacity. If, we're looking for a strong ETL engineer, would look for some orchestration experience with Airflow, with at least one scripting language like Python. Those are some of the key things that I look in when I'm hiring.
Something that's interesting, I think, within the data world in general is being able to understand the business impact and being able to articulate that. So I was curious, when you're talking to people and looking to hire, how can people articulate that either in a conversation and or first line of defense being their resume? How do people add that aspect to their resume?
Yeah, so definitely one of the things that I look for when I'm reviewing some engineer's resume, if they have some solid numbers, how their work or their projects impacted the business, like reduced costs by 50,000 or some like specific number, or increased or reduced processing time for building machine learning models from like a day to an hour to a few minutes, and kind of, give the hiring manager a chance to see that, you are a data engineer who is actually looking to make an impact on the business, and you care about getting the exact number of, of your impact.
Yeah, so it makes sense. So you quantify the results when you can with numbers.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. I think that way it kind of ties in both sides of the house. So I think that would be a good suggestion for anybody out there. And sometimes I guess maybe a follow up is there might not be a exact one to one. Well, we did this and this was the result. I guess in those circumstances, kind of articulating still maybe the purpose behind that project, would that then be sufficient if you can't use numbers to justify a result?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of projects do come out of a dire need of doing something. We've been seeing a lot of delays in processing for machine learning models, and a lot of times there's like a need to build a real-time model so that we can build better products for our customers. I mean, even if the model doesn't give you that much of impact, but the need to create a model and give a better customer experience is something that should be communicated, either not in the resume review, but when you're interviewing, definitely the reason behind why you got involved in the project and why it meant so much to you that you care to mention about it. I think that definitely helps.
And I think that's a good talking point is when you do get to that phone interview or, on site or nowadays maybe a remote, articulating the why behind what you did. I think it's really important. You can definitely chime in here as a hiring manager, knowing that the person that you're interviewing understands the why behind the actual work they did. That to me seems like it would be a big differentiator in folks in the data space.
Yeah, that's true, Ash, because when you hire them, you want to ask them the same questions. Why am I spending, 8 hours a day doing this work? How does it impact? And why is it so important that I spend so much time doing this? So definitely, that stands out.
And it makes sense, I guess, throughout the process. To get to that answer, you have to ask it while you're at your current job or previous job. So I think it's a good suggestion for everybody out there. Ask why. Why are we doing this? And I think the more you can tie in the business side to what you're doing from an engineering side, it'll help you in all aspects, doing the job and then articulating to a prospective new employer too.
Yep, that's true. That's true.
So I guess when you get to the interview, I think technically, most people, you either have certain technical skills or you don't. I think when it comes to some of those other areas and being able to articulate the why, the business side of things, what kind of soft skills do you think people can improve on, or any tips when people get to that point that you feel like you've seen that really has, made certain candidates stand out than versus others?
Even on the technical front, definitely engineers who, especially data engineers, going back to your business impact when you're working with, unstructured and structured data from very different and various sources. It's very important to be very good at data modeling, because the data that you're capturing and processing is going to be used by multiple business teams. Like the same data set could be used by a product manager or a marketing manager, and they would be looking at the same data in a very different way. So, even, having that good data modeling skill is super important, because, if you are not modeling data, then you would, in the right way, then you would not be able to present those insights in that way. And in going back to the soft skills, I usually ask a very simple question. I ask them, tell me a project that, you're really proud about. And if they can clearly explain that project in a very, concise way to me, with me having no context about it, but after their explanation and after, the description of how they went about the project, if I kind of get that context, I would have a lot of confidence in them, in hiring them, and being able to communicate with other senior leaders of the organization about, why they're doing this project. And, not everybody is technical enough to understand the jargons of data engineering or engineering in general, but if they're able to, communicate that in a clear and a concise way, that definitely stands out.
Do you think that clear and concise way is rudimentary, like if you could explain it to somebody that's really not in the engineering space or technical, or do you like that little bit more complex description of what they did? I think that's the difficult part sometimes is, as somebody that's getting interviewed, what level of detail does this person want about what I'm trying to convey? And then I always think if you can explain something at a basic level and somebody understands, then you really know what you're talking about. But I was curious, is that what you look for? Do you kind of look for some granular details that really make that person, exemplify what they know what they're talking about?
Yeah, so you can look at it as the first level of getting a high level, a 360 feet view of what the project was about. And if you are able to understand the project, and now you are curious about knowing more, then you would ask, hey, you know, I know that you built this machine learning model. What kind of model did you use? Did you use Spark? What machine learning libraries did you use? And then when you kind of get into the details and actually test them, whether you know are they just good at explaining things but also know the details of the project. So if they're able to even explain you how they calculated the processing time or the error rate for their models, that's something shows that not only they can explain but they can also get into the details and explain to somebody who is more knowledgeable on that sense.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think being clear and concise always is the good recipe for getting your point across. I guess with things having shifted, to remote interviews, what have you seen from candidates? Have you seen, anything that you think could be improved or anything that you see with that change impacting folks?
Yeah, I think the biggest change that we at StyleSeat have seen, is we usually invite people in for an on-site interview where we kind of give them a feel of how the office space looks like and how the pods are structured. But with the on-site not happening like in person, we moved to a face-to-face interview where some of the things have evolved. Like for example, we used to do a couple of whiteboarding sessions. When the candidate would be given like an abstract problem where they would be designing like a data model or a system design question, and there would be like a lot of back and forth. They would ask some questions and clarifying questions on what's the scope of the project, and all of these doing remotely. You kind of have to evolve your process. So at StyleSeat, what we did was replace the whiteboarding session to a Google Drawing session where we kind of have a template and a question in place already, and kind of have them. The template already has a few boxes and an example which they could reuse, so they don't spend that much of time just figuring out how Google Drawing works if they've not used it before. And also, usually we used to do a 45-minute session. Now we give them an hour just so that, in case there are technical difficulties or, they want to, they're not very familiar with Google Drawing and they are not able to complete it in that amount of time. Everybody is evolving their process and kind of learning on the way. So that's like the biggest learning, trying to evolve our process very quickly to find the best talent.
Yeah, I guess when it comes to whiteboarding, it's an area that I've heard from a lot of candidates and managers. That's kind of the make or break, right? It's kind of where you're explaining as the teacher the problem solving ability you have in real time, as close to it as possible. So I guess in that perspective, do you have any tips, advice for folks when they're tackling a whiteboarding exercise or challenge?
So one tip that I would definitely give is, it's with any whiteboarding, even in person, before jumping on to start, designing something, ask a lot of questions, just to understand scope, because a lot of times interviewers are looking for something very specific or very narrow in scope to start with. And then they want to, expand it to say, hey, how would you scale this notification feed system to, 10 million messages in an hour? So, you don't start with that big design. We start with something small, ask clarifying questions, and kind of confirm what the scope of the problem is, and then kind of focus on that. That's what interviewers like, I like, and then kind of, expand onto the edge cases and the corner cases and the cases.
Got it. So start narrow and grow out and ask the clarifying questions. And I think that goes back to tying in there's some business aspects to that context and clarifying questions. So I think the more you understand the scope, it's kind of that business analyst hat for a little bit as a data engineer or a data scientist. And we all know you need that little bit in your job. So I think that's a good tip for folks to focus on.
Yep. Yeah.
I know transitions for anybody in any career in writing, it's always tough to figure out how to go from A to B in that kind of in between spot. So I know at StyleSeat, you came in as a lead, got promoted to a manager pretty quickly. I was wanting to touch on that experience, how your day to day changed, and kind of dive into that mindset of, okay, I'm a lead. Now I'm tasked with growing a team. I was just curious, I guess, in that aspect, how was that experience for you? Kind of how did your day to day change?
So, when I got hired as the lead, I had a simple goal. In the first 30 to 60 days, we wanted to build a data warehouse, a single place where, we could point all our users to query and, kind of query the data and gain insights. And that was kind of the goal of this role. It was never meant to be like a people leadership role. It was supposed to be like, hey, let's try to build this. And, in those first few months, we kind of realized that, building this and investing in, growing and building your data infrastructure is not only helping people understand how our users use the system, but it's also helping us to track how our business is doing. So, you know, when you're a technical leader, you're basically, geared with taking a lot of technical decisions. Should I build versus buy? What frameworks to use? What languages to use? How are you going to model the data? And that's typically how your day to day looks like when you're a lead. But when the executive leadership says, hey, you know what? We want to invest more in this team. We want you to grow out the team. That requires a complete different mindset. You need to understand that, you're no longer the sole owner of the code base and all the technical decisions. You need to start delegating and hire engineers. Once you hire engineers, you need to start delegating and also give them the opportunity, empower them to take those decisions that you took and kind of, as a people leader, from your experience, kind of coach them how they can avoid the mistakes that you did, how they can code faster and kind of communicate outside of your team. So those were the things that, I realized kind of on the job. But, the transition is always a challenge. I think the sooner that you realize, it's better, because if you let this drag on, you unfortunately become the blocker for the team and kind of slow down the work that the team progresses.
So I guess for you, if you could go back to that transition happening, is there anything particularly that you wish you would have known that you might have done a little bit different? And it's not necessarily to, I guess, sometimes it's just mentally your mindset to be better prepared to handle what's coming. Is there anything that you might want to do over if you could?
I think giving the team more responsibility early on to take some key decisions, I think that's something that I would definitely go back and change, because, even in my early days as an engineering manager, I took a lot of technical decisions which I thought the team could have taken on their own and not, be given that kind of instruction from me. Because when you give the ownership to the team, they kind of get vested into the decision and they can drive the project much faster because it's their decision and they are kind of accountable and own that. So I think that's something that if I would go back, I would definitely change and, kind of give them the chance to prove that, they can, take on that responsibility. And I can kind of get that, I would say, visibility into the overall engineering organization also.
Yeah, no, I mean, that makes sense. I think once you give people that ability to kind of feel like they're making their own decisions, but you're still there, you're oversighting it, right? I think that, like you mentioned, it empowers them and it gives them that sense of, hey, I thought we should do this. So I now need to prove that it was the right decision rather than proving somebody else wrong or whatever the case is. So I think that's definitely a good point. You mentioned build versus buy. I know in this space, there's a lot of products coming out. There's tons of things right now people are using, especially with machine learning and AI. How do you go about making that decision? What kind of process do you go through for, deciding whether to build versus buy?
So as engineers, I think everybody's first instinct is to build because all engineers like to build things. But I think the way I usually do it is the cost of building an MVP versus cost of just evaluating a product off the shelf. When I had to decide whether I use a third-party ETL tool to basically ETL data from our source to our data warehouse, I had to make this decision. So, the time that I would have taken to figure out which tool to pick and integrate within our current infrastructure, I thought I could have built a MVP myself. So that's kind of the first level of evaluation that you would do, and the cost of maintenance. So with third-party tools, you get a lot of features which you might have to maintain or build in the future, and that's something that is definitely to keep in mind if you have to 5 or 6 engineers just to maintain this tool that you build versus you could pay $50 a month to a third party software, then you have to make that tool. You have to make that decision. So those are the couple of things I definitely see, cost to build the MVP and cost of maintenance. If you can evaluate them side to side, that's, usually makes the job a little bit easier.
Got it. So it sounds like the top two things when you are evaluating to buy or build is the actual just time and also the cost of it, which makes sense. It's the two parameters I think most people use when trying to make that sort of decision. But it's interesting to note that, sometimes buying it off the shelf is a better decision than building it in. And to your point, I know engineers love to build. So it's good to challenge yourself and really make sure that buying is not the better option just because you want to go and build some new toys. I know building a team, finding that right balance and kind of ratio of skill sets to what you need and then projecting forward. I know that can be tricky, especially when you haven't been in a leadership position. How do you kind of go about assessing current team, current projects, future projects, knowing kind of the roadmap at a high level? How do you go about building kind of the people around you to execute the business goals?
That's a very good question. So in the world of data, I think there are so many roles that kind of overlap with each other and kind of work also with each other. So they're working cross-functionally. Like, for example, analysts build dashboards. Sometimes data engineers also build dashboards. Analysts are basically reviewing product metrics, and data scientists are also doing the same thing. So those things have to be kept in mind when you're building out a team. In my opinion, you should hire data engineers first. I'm not biased because I'm a data engineer, but data engineers can provide the necessary infrastructure and the ETL pipelines and the data warehouse for the analysts and the data scientists to come in and start using it. If you hire them before the data engineers, they'll be still working on the legacy system and would have to take a lot of data engineering tasks on their end. That's basically something to keep in mind. If somebody's a new leader and they're looking to grow out the team, figure out what is the skill set and what is the infrastructure needs now, so that you can capitalize on hiring data scientists and analysts later on. And as the team progresses, you will see that your impact towards other areas of product also increase. So for example, StyleSeat, we started out as a team which is building dashboards and ETL pipelines, but now we are basically moving on to creating backend APIs. And that's when growing out team, you basically need to now hire backend engineers or data engineers who can write backend APIs to basically expand your reach into the product and kind of give the team an opportunity to make more impact. So that's something that you would realize on your way as the team kind of evolves. But definitely hire data engineers first, analysts, data scientists, and then kind of grow out the team.
And I like the fact that you said it, there's no bias there. So no, no, yeah, it's interesting. I think there's a lot of different ways to go about building a team. And I think to your point, it depends what you're getting yourself into, like how the current layout is, what's in place already, if it's from scratch versus not. But I think definitely, always having a solid infrastructure and then building on that sounds like that would be the way to kind of make everybody more efficient as they start joining the team in the future. You mentioned getting the team, empowering them, and delegating work to them. I guess in that same world, what's your style of, you know, coaching in that kind of environment? Because I think sometimes, people feel like, okay, I'm going to give you this. And then they kind of just, they don't want to be too hands on and feel like they're micro coaching their team or micromanaging them. And then they don't want to be so hands off that, somebody feels like they're on an island by themselves and, can't come to you for help, or if they get stuck, they keep spinning their wheels. So how do you go about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, even the part of, a engineering manager's involvement, pre-COVID and post-COVID is like so different. So previously when we were all in office, you would have a stand up and then, you say, hey, person XYZ is going to work on this task. And then usually we do a pretty good job of communicating the ETA that this is when, this task is supposed to be done. And it was easy to follow up, hey, how's the task going on? And then you would get like a quick update on this. Post COVID, you have to schedule some time and you have to kind of follow up, and that might come off as micromanaging. But, there's something, in my opinion, that needs to be done for teams who were, in person and now are remote because there's no interaction, like face-to-face interaction. So you need to have that, daily sync ups on the task that you're working on, and kind of just quickly asking, how are you blocked? Are you moving forward? Do you need any help from me? I don't directly ask how that particular task is going on. I just ask if you're blocked on something. And if they do mention that, I've been stuck at this thing for almost a couple of hours and I cannot move forward, and that's where I jump in and kind of give them a, suggestion on how to proceed. But I usually let them take that first step.
Do you give them some parameters? I think it's trying to solve a problem. Like you said, you get blocked. You say, look, if you're spinning your wheels for more than 4 hours on one particular task, that's too much. Like, do they have some sort of, baseline to then realize this is now the time that I need to touch base? Because I think sometimes people want their employees and their team members to solve problems on their own, which I think is great. But then now it's a law of diminishing returns. So do you give them some parameters of, okay, now come to me if you've got, been doing something too long?
Yeah, usually we time box, tickets to like 2 to 3 hours. If you're stuck and cannot move forward for that much of time, that's when usually, the engineers reach out to the engineering managers. They might be blocked on some other team, or they might be, blocked on something with our own infrastructure. So that's something that they need to call out immediately. And that's the culture kind of I basically kind of have in the team, that you time box all your efforts. If, let's say, you're troubleshooting mismatch in numbers from 2019 to 2020, and you spend like an hour and you're still not able to figure it out, that's when you reach out for help. You time box certain efforts. You spend that much of time, but if you are not able to move forward, don't hesitate to reach out and seek help.
Do you feel like you're getting a lot more, I don't know, G chat messages or Slack messages working remotely now? Because, I think sometimes when you're in office, you can see somebody's headphones are on. Okay, they're working. Like, do you feel like you're getting hit up a lot more as a manager at home than you did while you guys were in the office?
Yeah, definitely. The number of Slack messages have gone up. And I think I can say it's not necessarily bad. I usually want people to reach out and kind of get their questions answered rather than, getting stuck and feeling that, my manager is not available for me or the person is not available for me. It's a slippery slope. If you are always responding and even responding to it during off hours, I think that's something, you kind of set a wrong precedent also. So usually I've been much better at, blocking off calendars for lunch and some walks, and even like snoozing my notifications on Slack for some time. So a person who's messaging knows that my notifications are paused for some time. So they know if it's urgent, that they would definitely reach out and get my attention. But that's my equivalent of, getting my headphones on and get some work done. But, everybody's kind of figuring this out as they're going. So this might not be the best way to manage this, but I think it's perfectly working well for me and my team.
Yeah, I think it's about flexibility. I think, every team has its own culture. And I think the teams that tend to operate more efficiently and better, it's still communicating, whether that's, in person or through Slack or any other, messaging system. to your point, I think that's great. It's like, hey, I need a couple hours to do my job too, and maybe be hands on if you're in a smaller team and you are still very hands on yourself, for them to know that I'm not ignoring you. I'm here. If you need me, call me. Use the bat phone. Give me a call. That's 911 sort of thing. So, no, I think that's great advice. So, yeah, Kunal, I appreciate you being on the call on this podcast. I guess if somebody has any follow up questions or any tips or advice, would reaching out on LinkedIn be the way to touch base with you?
Yeah, that's the best way to get hold of me. I usually respond to LinkedIn messages very promptly. So, yep, send me a LinkedIn message if you have any questions about data engineering or in general about if you're wondering, what I do or how I can help you. Very happy to help you.
Awesome. Yeah, we appreciate that. Hopefully, everybody enjoyed this episode, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.